The bloodied alien princess lay crumpled in the smouldering wreckage of her escape pod, as plasma fire scorched the jungle around them. Sergeant Jacob Simpson of the Terran Defense Force gathered her limp body in his arms, knowing that without him, she would die. His 12-man squad had been ambushed by the Pakled raiders on this remote jungle moon during a routine patrol. The dropship they arrived on, the TDS Valiant, had been shot down. He was the sole survivor, pinned behind the wreckage. He popped up and squeezed off a burst from his pulse rifle. 3 reptilian Pakled dropped, but more were coming. He checked his ammo. Not enough. He would have to make a run for it. Just then, a silver spacecraft streaked overhead. Pakled attack ships in pursuit. They stitched it with plasma bolts until smoke poured out, and it spiraled down to a hard landing 500 meters away. An opportunity. Jacob pulled his last 2 grenades, lobbed them at the advancing Pakled line, and sprinted for the wreck as the explosions rang out behind him. He found her dragging herself from the twisted metal, leaving a trail of blue blood, slender, pale blue skin, pure white hair. Not Pakled, not any species he knew. Her strange eyes met his, just before she collapsed. The Pakled would be on them any second. He had to move. Scooping her up, he charged into the dense jungle, his only chance to survive. Her only chance. The Pakled were close behind, their guttural barks echoing through the trees. Jacob clutched the injured princess tight to his chest. He didn't know who she was or how she got here, but letting her fall into their clawed hands was not an option. The Pakled were known for brutality and torture. He would get them out of this. He had to, or they would both die in agony on this forsaken moon, light years beyond any hope of rescue. Jacob crashed through the thick underbrush, his boots pounding against the damp earth. The weight of the alien princess in his arms slowed him, but he pushed on, fueled by the sounds of Pakled pursuit echoing behind them. He had to find cover, had to treat her wounds. He risked a glance down at her face, pale and bruised. Her eyes fluttered and she let out a soft moan of pain. Jacob's breath came hard. He had to stop. Now. Spotting a dense tangle of vines, he ducked behind them, gently laying the princess on the soft moss. He pulled up the med scanner on his wrist display. A few taps brought the results into sharp focus. It wasn't good. Broken radius, multiple lacerations, probable concussion. She needed more than a field dressing, but it would have to do. Retrieving his survival pack, Jacob set to work. He snapped a flexible splint around her arm, immobilizing the break. Then he broke out the coagulant gel, smearing it liberally over her cuts. As he worked, her eyes suddenly snapped open, locking to his. She spoke, her voice soft and accented. You're human, a soldier?" Jacob nodded. "Sergeant Jacob Simpson, Terran Defense Force, what's your name?" "I am Princess Wesen of the Aurelian Empire." She winced as she tried to sit up. "My ship, the Pakled, attacked my convoy. I barely escaped. I must warn my people." Jacob sat back on his haunches. A princess, a human soldier and an alien royal stranded on a hostile moon. The universe had a sense of humor. "Your Highness, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we've got Pakled hunting parties scouring this jungle for us. We need to move. I don't suppose your people have an outpost on this rock." Wesen's brow furrowed in thought. "Yes, a small monitoring station, on the far side of the moon. But to reach it, we would have to cross the Zeta 9 equatorial jungle. It's hundreds of miles of dense foliage, treacherous rivers, and deadly predators." Jacob checked his rifle. Half a power cell left. It would have to be enough. "Then that's where we're headed. We can't stay here. I'll help you walk until you get your strength back. But we have to go now, before the Pakled pick up our trail." Wesen looked into his eyes searchingly, then nodded. Jacob helped her to her feet, steadying her as she swayed. Step by step, they melted into the dense green, leaving the wreckage behind. As they walked, Jacob found himself studying the alien princess. She was unlike any being he had encountered, willowy and ethereal, but with a core of steel. She didn't complain, didn't slow, even as he knew every step must be agony. "So, Your Highness, I have to ask, what brings an Aurelian royal out to the ass end of space?" Jacob ducked a low-hanging vine, careful not to jostle her injured arm. Wesen was silent for a moment. I was on a diplomatic mission to the Galactic Council. The Pakled have been raiding our outer colonies, taking hundreds of my people as slaves. I was to petition the Council for aid, but the Pakled ambushed us. She looked away, her voice hardening. The Council has ignored our pleas for help. They see us as weak, a fading empire. This attack, it will be seen as proof. If I do not reach our outpost, if I do not survive, my people... Jacob reached out, clasping her uninjured hand. You will survive. We both will. I'm going to get you to that outpost, Princess, I promise. Wesen met his gaze, and in that moment something passed between them, an understanding born of shared struggle. I believe you, Sergeant Simpson. Together, we will endure. Their conversation lapsed into silence as they concentrated on navigating the dense undergrowth. But the jungle seemed to press in around them, filled with unseen menace. From the shadows, predatory eyes watched the unlikely pair, assessing, waiting. Above, the sun began to set, staining the sky the color of blood. As the sun sank lower and the shadows lengthened, Jacob and Wesen pushed on through the jungle, their steps heavy with fatigue. Jacob's eyes scanned the dense foliage, alert for any sign of Pakled pursuit. Wesen matched his pace, her jaw set against the pain of her injuries. Suddenly Jacob held up a hand, signaling for Wesen to stop. There, half hidden beneath a curtain of vines, stood an ancient stone structure. Wesen's eyes widened in recognition. "That's an Aurelian temple," she whispered, "from the time before our empire took to the stars." Jacob frowned. "We should keep moving. The Pakled—" "No," Wesen cut him off. "There may be technology inside, weapons that could aid our escape. We must investigate." Against his better judgment, Jacob nodded. They approached the temple cautiously, Jacob's rifle at the ready. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of age. Wesen led the way, her fingers tracing faded hieroglyphs on the walls. At the center of the temple, they found what Wesen had been hoping for. A cache of Aurelian weapons, untouched for centuries. Jacob lifted a plasma sword, marveling at its balance and craftsmanship. Wesen strapped a portable energy shield generator to her wrist. But as Jacob took an experimental swing with the sword, a deep rumble shook the temple. Ancient gears ground to life, and a swarm of guardian drones descended from the ceiling, their optics glowing red. "Run!" Jacob yelled, slashing a drone in half. They sprinted through the collapsing corridors, dodging falling chunks of masonry and the laser fire of the drones. Wesen activated her energy shield, deflecting a volley of shots. Jacob ducked and rolled, coming up to impale another drone. They burst from the temple just as it imploded behind them, a cloud of ancient dust billowing into the sky. But their relief was short-lived. The jungle erupted with plasma fire as Pakled forces emerged from the trees, led by a massive commander wielding a crackling energy whip. Jacob and Wesen found themselves surrounded, backed against the rubble of the temple. The Pakled commander sneered, his whip coiling like a snake. "Surrender, human," he growled. "The princess comes with us." Jacob stepped forward, his plasma sword igniting with a hiss. "She's not going anywhere." With a roar, the Pakleds attacked. Jacob became a blur of motion, his sword a whirling arc of destruction. Wesen fired precise shots from behind her energy shield, dropping Pakled warriors left and right. But the Pakled commander was a formidable foe. He lashed out with his whip, the crackling energy barely missing Jacob's head. Jacob lunged, his sword clashing against the commander's armor. They dueled across the rubble, plasma sword against energy whip, in a brutal display of combat skill. Jacob ducked and weaved, landing glancing blows, but the commander was fast, his whip a deadly blur. In a final desperate gambit, Jacob feinted left, then dove right. The commander's whip slashed down, but Jacob was already inside his guard. With a triumphant cry, Jacob drove his plasma sword through the commander's chest. The Pakled forces, seeing their leader fall, scattered into the jungle. Jacob stood over the commander's body, his chest heaving. Weizen limped to his side, her energy shield flickering. "We need to move," she said, her voice tight with pain. "More will come." Jacob nodded, deactivating his sword. Together they melted back into the jungle, their newly forged bond stronger than ever. The temple and the battle faded behind them, but the long trek to the Aurelian outpost still lay ahead, and somewhere out there, the Pakled still hunted them. As the dense jungle gave way to the outskirts of the Aurelian outpost, Jacob and Weizen's relief quickly turned to dread. The once pristine buildings now bore scars of battle, the perimeter walls scorched by plasma fire. Pakled guards patrolled the grounds, their reptilian eyes scanning for any signs of resistance. Jacob crouched behind a fallen tree, Weizen at his side. "They've taken the outpost," he whispered, his grip tightening on his plasma sword. Weizen's face hardened. "My people are inside, we have to get them out." Jacob nodded, his mind racing. A frontal assault would be suicide, but there was another way. "The maintenance tunnels," he said, pointing to a barely visible grate half hidden by foliage. "I can sneak in, find the captives, but I'll need a distraction." Weizen's energy shield flickered to life. "Leave that to me." With a final nod, they split up. Jacob pried open the grate, slipping into the damp, dimly lit tunnel. The sounds of battle soon echoed from above as Weizen engaged the Pakled forces. The tunnel led Jacob deep into the heart of the outpost. He emerged in a utility room, the hum of generators masking his footsteps. Creeping through the corridors, he followed the sounds of Pakled voices until he reached the central control room. Peering through a crack in the door, he saw a dozen Aurelian captives guarded by heavily armed Pakleds. Among them, a tall figure in regal robes, Prince Zor-El, Weizen's brother. Jacob readied his plasma sword. He'd have to be fast. He burst through the door, his sword a blur of crackling energy. The Pakled guards fell before they could even raise their weapons. The captives looked up in shock as Jacob cut through their bonds. "Prince Zor-El?" Jacob asked, helping the regal Aurelian to his feet. Zor-El nodded, his eyes widening with recognition. "You're the human soldier, the one who saved my sister." Before Jacob could respond, the door burst open. Weizen and Zor-El charged in, energy weapons blazing. The remaining Pakleds in the room fell under the onslaught. Zor-El embraced his sister, then turned to Jacob. "We have much to discuss, but first we must retake this outpost." Together the trio formed a plan. Jacob would lead a frontal assault, drawing the Pakled's attention. Weizen and Zor-El would flank from the sides, their superior technology giving them an edge. They burst from the control room, weapons ready. Jacob became a whirlwind of plasma sword and pulse rifle fire, cutting down Pakleds left and right. Weizen's energy shield deflected incoming fire as she dispatched foes with precise plasma shots. Zor-El wielded a crackling energy staff, felling Pakleds with each sweeping blow. The battle was fierce, but the tide began to turn. The Pakleds, faced with the fury of two Aurelian royals and a battle-hardened Terran soldier, began to falter. As the last Pakled fell, Jacob and Weizen stood amid the wreckage, chests heaving. Their eyes met, a moment of triumph and shared understanding passing between them. But the moment was shattered by an urgent beep from the control room's comms. Zor-El rushed to the console, his face going pale. "Pakled invasion fleet," he said, his voice grim. "They've entered the system, and they're heading straight for Zeta 9. Jacob and Weizen exchanged a look, the weight of the news settling on their shoulders. Their fight was far from over. In the Aurelian outpost's war room, Jacob, Weizen, and Zor-El huddled around a holographic display of Zeta 9. The red blips of the Pakled invasion fleet blinked ominously, drawing ever closer. "We're out of time," Zor-El growled. "We need a plan now." Jacob studied the display, his mind racing. His eyes locked onto a small mountain peak, just outside the outpost's perimeter. "There," he said, pointing, "the comms array. If we can repair it, broadcast an EMP—" "It could disable the Pakled fleet," Weizen finished, her eyes widening. "But the array is heavily guarded. We'd need a strike team to—" "I'll lead it," Jacob cut in. I'll take a small team, fight our way to the array. Zor-El, you and Wesen coordinate the outpost's defenses. Wesen started to object, but Jacob met her gaze, his eyes intense. I need you here, leading your people. She hesitated, then nodded. Go, we'll hold the line. Minutes later, Jacob and a squad of Aurelian soldiers crept through the jungle, the mountain looming ahead. The sounds of battle echoed behind them as Wesen and Zor-El led the outpost's forces against the Pakled ground troops. They hit the Pakled perimeter hard, plasma swords and pulse rifles blazing. Jacob was a whirlwind of destruction, carving a path through the reptilian soldiers, but the Pakleds kept coming, wave after wave. One by one, Jacob's team fell. A plasma bolt took Ralik in the chest. Sira went down fighting, taking 3 Pakleds with her. Korath, wounded and out of ammo, threw himself into a Pakled squad, detonating his grenades. Each loss hit Jacob like a hammer blow, but he pushed on, his jaw set. There was no turning back. At last they reached the array. Jacob burst into the control room, dispatching the Pakled guards with brutal efficiency. His hands flew over the console, rerouting power, initializing the broadcast. Just a few more seconds. The room shook as a shadow fell over the mountain. Jacob looked up to see a Pakled warship descending, its cannons aimed directly at him. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. But the end didn't come. A familiar silver fighter streaked into view, lasers flashing. Wesen. She danced around the warship, drawing its fire away from Jacob. He slammed his fist on the console. The array pulsed, a shimmering wave of energy radiating out into the sky. In the distance, the Pakled fleet faltered, their systems flickering and dying. But Wesen's fighter was faltering too, smoke pouring from its engines. The warship bore down on her, its cannons glowing. Wesen! Jacob screamed into his comm. Get out of there! Her voice came back, calm and clear. Jacob, thank you for everything. He watched in helpless horror as her fighter blazed forward, ramming into the warship's bridge in a blinding flash of light. The warship listed, then exploded, raining debris down onto the jungle canopy. Wesen's fighter spiraled away, a flaming comet that vanished into the trees. Jacob fell to his knees, a howl of anguish tearing from his throat. Around him the wreckage of the array sparked and smoldered. It was Zor-El who found him there hours later. The prince's face was streaked with soot and blood, his eyes hollow. They stood together amidst the ruins, united in their grief. She saved us all, Zor-El said softly. My sister, your friend. Jacob couldn't speak. The weight of it was too much. Wesen, the other soldiers, all those lives given for this victory. Zor-El gripped his shoulder. We'll make sure they didn't die in vain. We'll drive the Pakleds back, secure a future for both our peoples. Jacob nodded, a cold fire kindling in his chest. He had a new mission now, a promise to keep. He looked up at the sky, where the last of the Pakled fleet was disappearing into the void. He would follow them. He would end this war, for Wesen, for everyone. Jacob and Zor-El turned away from the mountain, back towards the outpost and the challenges ahead. The galaxy was waiting, and Jacob was ready to meet it head-on. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.